What's up, everyone? My name's David Mirynech, and I'm the founder and CEO of FanClub Sports Capital. Very excited to welcome you to another edition of the Owners Club podcast. Every other week, we'll discuss all things sports finance, M&A, and more with some of the biggest names in the industry to give you a unique perspective and insight into what's happening in the world of pro sports ownership. Daniel McClory is the Managing Director and the Head of Equity Capital Markets at Bowstead Securities, as well as the Executive Chairman of Brera Holdings. In this conversation, we talk about public offerings of multi-club ownership, ESG and impact sports investing, investing in non-traditional markets, and much more.
David Mirynech runs FanClub Sports Capital. All views expressed by him and the guests on his podcast are solely their opinions and do not reflect the views of FanClub Sports Capital. You should not treat any opinion expressed by Dave or his guests as specific inducement to make a particular investment or follow a particular strategy, but only as an expression of his personal opinion. This podcast is for informational purposes only.
All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Owners Club podcast. And I am here today with Dan McClory. Thanks so much for coming, Dan.
Sure thing. Really looking forward to it, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we are here today to talk a little European football, multi-club ownership, public multi-club ownership, ESG, sports investing. But I think just before we do that, let's kind of peel it back a little bit here, Dan, and, just take us through your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So originally from Detroit, but spent most of my career in Southern California in investment banking and merchant banking. International is the common characteristic in companies that I've underwritten for IPOs, that have financed prior to that, and that I've become involved with as a significant shareholder. I also share a background in being a dual citizen of Italy and speaking the language and having a home there. So spending a lot of time there. And it was on it's a great place to be, right? We could be pretty much anywhere right nowadays, but I'd put Italy right up there. And it was on a trip to Italy about 18 months ago that I sat down with some friends that I'd known for 30 years and asked them what was going on with their football team in Milan. And they said it was going great and everything was super, and they had heard about all these Americans with maybe more money than brains that have showed up in Italy and, started buying things. And they said, we're approaching it completely differently. And we'd love to share the story with you. And they did. And as soon as I finished that dinner, I said, we should list this team. It's called Brera. BREA now is the ticker on NASDAQ. I said, we should list it on NASDAQ. And they said, no, come on. And I said, watch me. And we did. And the rest is still unfolding before our eyes right now, but we have a very distinct and unique brand of multi-club ownership meets social impact soccer. And it's quite the trend. It's always interesting when your passion or your interest coincides with a market opportunity. But lo and behold, here's this great market opportunity for multi-club ownership that everybody's waking up to. And it's kind of been in our DNA for quite some time.
No, that's awesome, Dan. And we definitely feel, the same way here at FanClub. We know it's your business to IPO companies, right? Take them public. What was the thought process behind the public IPO of Brera, right? It's not something that we see that frequently within the sports market. Why was that an appropriate strategy to consider?
Yeah, great question, Dave. It is among the least dilutive forms of capital that are out there. It creates a platform, if you're an MCO player, to actually use your shares to acquire other teams. And as I've come to see with all of the inbound activity we've gotten at Brera from clubs who want to sell to us, and then the clubs that we had already targeted to purchase, having NASDAQ listed shares is quite an advantage. So despite the small and modest size of our IPO, we raised all of $7.5 million US. We've already registered quite high on the awareness meter. And surprisingly, we are the first football team from Italy to ever list on either NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. So again, despite our modest size and our kind of humble beginnings, we immediately rose to a position of prominence because there's something that accrues to the first. They say Pioneers get arrows in their back, but they also get land rights. And so we kind of have these land rights now. And it's been absolutely fantastic to see the market reaction and the inbound of lots of other opportunities.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's interesting considering you have clubs in Italy like Juventus who are publicly traded, but have never made their way over to the North American markets. Maybe let's just take a little bit of a step back here, right? And speak to me as if you're speaking to someone who has never thought about investing into football before.
Well, the high level opportunity is European football clubs have risen to a level of value, prominence, and really transactability that's kind of unheard of in the professional sports space. So if you were to pick a category, it would absolutely be about football or soccer, as opposed to American football or basketball or baseball or even hockey. So number one, it has been undiscovered until relatively lately. And I'm going to say in the last decade, it started to become discovered. But really in the last few years, it's almost seen as an alternative asset class that, despite the P&L ups and downs of these clubs, their value, their brand equity, in some cases, the tangible assets they hold, like their grounds and stadium, have increased into the billions. So it's a sport that I think is just now breaking out in any opportunity. You have money that piles in kind of reactively, perhaps stupidly, that drives prices up. You have people that then wait for moments to buy, and you have others that kind of construct it brick by brick, which is really what we're doing with Brera. We're kind of doing it one team and one deal at a time. I've had a lot of people approach me. I've got 6 clubs I want to buy. I want to raise $200 million. I'm like, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. Buy one, and then you should add on to it like we're doing at Brera.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think, that's what we hear a lot from our investors, from different groups who are looking at these markets in European football. They're seeing, number one, they might be priced out of North American markets in terms of professional sports clubs. You can get a lot more value, over the pond. I think number two, you look at some of these clubs that have thousands of fans, right? And I think they might not necessarily have employed the strongest commercialization strategies. And so we see groups coming over the pond. They're like, well, what if I slap naming rights on the stadium, right? What if I pull in some music acts and entertainment to utilize the stadium 365 days a year? And I think that that's kind of the low-hanging fruit that is also propelling it. But then I think ultimately this third reason is that there's this upward mobility, right? If you buy in a lower league, you actually stand the chance to go through the pyramid of European football and face grander European competition. And I'd just love to hear from you. You guys have a very interesting strategy. And it's actually quite interesting because I personally have this thesis, right? And this thesis in this space is that we are seeing the maturation of the sports investing market into purpose-driven and thematic investing, right? Kind of like venture capital almost in 2006. You had the big institutionals, the Sequoias of the world. They might have just been software versus hardware were kind of the only verticals being invested in. And then you start to see things verticalize, right? Get tighter and tighter into different theses. You saw more investors come in varying sizes and shapes. And I think we're seeing the beginnings of this in the sports market right now. You have institutionalization at the top, right? The CVC capitals, the Arctos, but then we're also seeing this cottagization throughout. And I'll tell you what attracted me to your guys' project initially, was just that I think it demonstrates this maturation of the sports investing market, right? We're no longer resolved to majority PE stakes versus minority stakes, right? We're not talking about buying clubs in the same market. I think you guys really have something sort of unique about your thesis. And can you maybe just speak to that direction, touch on the ESG and the non-traditional markets?
Absolutely. And again, the sound bites that you just shared with our listeners here and our viewers are really sage. And you have a unique background, Dave, that you've pulled those from. You didn't show up 5 minutes ago and say, oh, MCO, this is a new fad. Let's get behind it. You've been studying it. You've been analyzing professional sports for a long time. So I think you're spot on with a number of these trends. And, democratization is an often used word, but making available to people beyond the Glazer family and Man United, or Abramovich with Chelsea, or any number of other, you mentioned institutional investors like CVC, et cetera. Bringing it down to street level is super important because, I'm wearing a Brera scarf. This is, supporters, they have it in their blood. They love these. Having the ability to back and support and invest in a team is something that, apart from, say, Real Madrid being, owned by its fans.
Model. Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, you really haven't been able to participate in this. So now you can. So what's the best model to get involved with? Well, some of those clubs are getting priced into oblivion. Some of them are inaccessible unless, you have the secret unlisted home phone number of a private equity guy or a VC that got in early. But bringing it all out and bearing it with disclosure and compliance and a public company listing, that really says a lot. And that allows prospective investors to get some unique insights. But even when you get it out there, you got to differentiate yourself. You can't be the same old. You can't be a irrationally exuberant American that shows up in Italy and thinks he's going to change the way the world works. It's just not going to happen. So what we did is we've stuck to our authenticity with Brera, which is social impact soccer. And the Internet Marketing Association in October of last year gave us an award for the Social Impact Soccer Team of the Year. So we've actually been recognized for that. But, what does that mean other than differentiating us and various sound bites? It means that in our DNA, in the way we're set up as a team, that we're bringing a whole nother set of revenue models and operational models. So, I'll start with the team. We're an amateur team in Italy, in the equivalent of the 7th division. Okay, but we have a rainbow roster. It's got players from about 18 different countries. Some of those players were refugees. A lot of them are immigrants. Some of them are unemployed. Some of them are students. Some of them were even boat people that showed up on the shores of Italy. So we have this rainbow roster, which shows that we're inclusive. We've taken the brand that we created in Italy for Brera, and we've gotten great awareness and great knowledge of this in our market and our local market. We're the 3rd most recognized football brand in Milan, behind only Milan and Inter, both billion. And so how do you do that? You do that because you become relevant. You take your authenticity and you become relevant. So what do? We've sponsored leagues in prisons. We've taught prisoners how to be referees. We've gone into vocational tech schools where there's kids of immigrants, and we've helped teach them soccer and give them other activities. We've engaged in a number of things that are just happen to be now, with all the emphasis on social impact and ESG, extremely relevant. But Brera's been doing that for 20 years. It's not a new skin that we adopted because it's fashionable or current today. So we have this brand, and it's great in Italy, and it's got a lot of street cred. But what are we doing about it? So now we're exporting the brand. It's sort of a made in Italy brand that's being exported, not to mainstream markets, but what we call tertiary, 3rd level, microstates, small countries within Europe, countries who are members of UEFA. And if you win that country's annual tournament or championship, you can go on to a UEFA tournament and get $250,000, $1 million, $2 million of appearance or prize money. So, countries that aren't in the normal recall of mainstream fans everywhere, like North Macedonia, Gibraltar, Andorra, Liechtenstein, San Marino, all members of UEFA, all have national championships, all allow us to, on a very modest basis, invest, acquire, operate clubs, and move them. They all will be in the 1st divisions, as we've already announced, and move them into a championship tier and ideally onto UEFA tournaments. And then marrying that with an emerging market, Mozambique, where we just started a team, as a feeder system, as a beginnings of a human capital and talent development market that can play into the transfer market to some of the clubs that we own and will own and operate within Europe. So that's how we're kind of pulling it all together and having, I'll use your analogy, a venture capital type approach, because we're going to end up with half a dozen of these squads in these various countries within our first year. And some will win, some will lose, some will become more valuable, some will flatline perhaps. but they're all going to have our overlay, and they're all going to have a shot at greatness and promotion.
No, I think that's really cool, and I think it's definitely a bit of a contrarian approach, right? Going to these non-traditional markets, but as you mentioned, it is, a more efficient path to pan-European competition. So I guess what interests me, Dan, is how do you go out and identify these assets, right, that fit this thesis? What's your guys' sourcing mechanism, and how willing are these clubs to actually kind of enter, the mothership of Brera under this public market structure?
Yeah, well, Dave, I think with what you've created, you've been a great example of this. I mean, it's always better when people call you instead of you having to call them. And a lot of people call you. And you get a lot of inbound. You've shared with me some of the various clubs that have signed up for your service and that are actively on your platform. The same thing is happening with us. I always tell our clients when I'm the investment banker that, when you IPO, you get three kinds of phone calls. Somebody wants to buy you, somebody wants to sell you something, and somebody wants to give you money. And all those things have happened. So although we've had a very premeditated and pre-identified list of targets and countries before we ever thought about listing on NASDAQ, we have received multiple opportunities on top of that because of the awareness that our NASDAQ IPO gave us. Again, similar to when you set up your platform, you said, look, we're going to be at the apex of this industry. So now everybody wants to talk to you. So
sure.
It's gotten to the point where we have a form that we have clubs fill out when they say, hey, you should buy us. We say, great, fill out this form. We'll let you know if we're interested. And most of them do. And we've heard from Irish Premiership teams. We've heard from teams certainly now all across Africa. We've heard from more developed European markets like Spain and Portugal and even Germany. So just like the way you conduct your business, you got to be disciplined. You've got to be discerning. You've got to, stick to your criteria. And that's what we're doing. We are open to other opportunities. We had a really good pipeline heading into this, and we're adding to it every day.
That's awesome. And that's great, Dan. And I think, for me, the question is, there's really, when you enter the public markets, right, there's sort of these two groups of individuals you're targeting, right? You got your institutional investors that can only invest in publicly traded stocks. And then you have your retail investors who have never had the opportunity to access, this asset class before, or a multi-club ownership group. And so maybe you can just speak to both ends, right? What has the response been from the institutional folk? What has the response been from the retail folk?
Yeah, and I'll add another level on that. Other clubs, other first division clubs in mainstream markets, a number of them have called us and said, we're cheering for you. You guys are breaking new ground here. Way to go. Make it happen, that kind of a thing. For institutions like CBC that you point out and others, we're too small. And they've got an eye open. And we've heard from at least one that has said, hey, since you have a NASDAQ listed vehicle, we want to acquire, maybe we put money into you almost like a SPAC and we buy other things together because you're good to go. You're ready, you're positioned, you've got a following. But we haven't arrived at that institutional level yet. I think where we've really seen a lot of momentum is from the retail, high net worth, ultra high net worth, and family office segments of the industry, where they're not in a position perhaps to do extensive due diligence on a particular team that might be private and figure out, should I tie up my money? But with the amount of disclosure that you have to make to the SEC and when you list on NASDAQ, we're a pretty easy open book for somebody to get a handle on. And that's where most of the uptake has been. But I'll let you know that in some of these tertiary markets we're operating in, perhaps Africa, perhaps North Macedonia, the securities markets aren't as evolved. And so we're looking at new and innovative digital securities such as NFTs that might start out as a fan reward, that might have some participation in a digital dividend for our actual stock that trades on NASDAQ. So we're attempting to identify with our investor base, our prospective investor base, and the community that we're building around Brera with unique and novel forms of securities that you'll see us talking about in the coming weeks and months. So we've really been able to get a nice entry into that retail high net worth investor market, and we've received a very good response thus far.
Yeah, no, definitely very interested to learn more once that comes out. I think it's interesting because we sort of came to 2023 this year, and we've seen over the last, let's call it 24 months, right, private equity start to really park their money within these assets. But, you got to know that private equity has some sort of investment horizon, right? they're investing for 4 to 7 years. They want some kind of exit. And, we haven't really seen clear examples, maybe aside Madison Square Garden in the US, the Atlanta Braves, a couple select European football clubs, but we haven't really seen, those exits opportunity exist within private market clubs. And you're now sort of forging that path, right? We saw Eagle Football Holdings announce some plans for a listing, but you guys have done it, right? You've listed, you're almost the canary in the coal mine. Do you think you've started a trend here, Dan?
Well, I hope we have, because again, in our DNA, we want to inspire others. We want to drive people, whether it's, our largely immigrant players, our tertiary European markets that might be ignored, our developmental program in Africa. We want to inspire and provide paths for upward mobility, for equality of opportunity. And I'm going to answer you immediately, Dave, by saying I think we have. Although most of the responsiveness has been from those more established players who were perhaps trying to raise money from private equity. And now they're like rethinking this. Maybe I should open on Broadway instead of off Broadway. Maybe I should go right to those public markets instead of holding off and thinking I have to build my way up to a liquidity event or a liquidity exchange. So I think we have provided that. And again, the calls we get are either, Dan, you guys should buy us at Brera, or you should help us do what you did for Brera. And we'll continue to evaluate those opportunities, but I wouldn't be surprised to see others catching fire and, understanding the art of the possible. And it can happen.
Definitely. No, I think it's awesome to consider just, if you just added more tools to the tool belt, right, for clubs to consider and pursuing liquidity alternatives. So we know you started off with Brera. You guys raised $7.5 million USD, if I'm correct here. Can you break any news on developments, Dan? Any recent deals you guys have completed? Can we be the source of your information here?
Well, no, listen, we made sure before we ever went public that we packed our prospectus with a lot of good material that really gave some direction to what our strategy is, as opposed to, well, we're going to take the proceeds and use it for acquisitions. We talked about specific markets like the ones I mentioned, the tertiary microstates of Europe. And every day we continue to make progress on targets in all those countries that I've mentioned, and even others. I think the challenge has been to be disciplined and discerning about, oh my gosh, another bright, shiny object over here. We haven't considered, I don't know, pick a country. But I got to say, Dave, you've opened my eyes to a couple of other not immediately mainstream European markets where you have clients and you have opportunities that you're actively featuring on your platform. So long as we can get them to fit in that criteria, we're all ears and we're totally open to it. But in terms of news flow, I think the main themes, we've mentioned, which first and foremost, we're going to keep executing on what we said we were going to do. Secondly, this form of some type of a digital dividend, some type of a digital security, because it lends itself to companies who have a fan base, who have a following, who have that kind of grassroots support. We're not selling widgets or blocks of concrete or something. We have something that people, they wear the scarf, they're very passionate about. So that's logical for us to move into. We also have been paying a lot of attention to some of the other publicly traded mega teams. Man U would be at the top of that list. And, is that a good investing opportunity just as a diversification? They're about 4.6 billion US dollars in market cap on the NYSE, but kind of the lowest number I've heard in terms of what somebody is offering to pay is $5 or $5.5.
It's a bit of a discount. Yeah, it's a bit of a discount to the most recent sale price, no doubt. And I think they've actually found the same thing with the MSG entity. So the Rangers and the Knicks have always been talked about being just a bit of a discount to the private markets. So definitely interesting to consider.
Yeah, there's some value arbitrage there, and I think there's some value to be realized. But we're very strident and we're very authentic about who we are. And again, the social impact aspect of Brera is key. So, could we impart some of that to Manchester United? Perhaps we could. Perhaps we could show them our model and how there's ways to build value across the board, and not just by increasing ticket prices or making money trading players or, rebuilding new stadiums or whatever the case might be that they're considering. So that's something that's crossed our mind. The other is, our tournament. It's a UEFA sanctioned tournament.
Was my next question. Yeah.
Well, there you go. So you're onto it. But the
Yeah.
reason this ties into Man U is the champion of that tournament last year in its first year was FCUM, which is Football Club United of Manchester. And I challenge you to say that acronym quickly without invoking a four-letter word. But FCUM
Sure.
Was the fan-based, organically generated team that was started in opposition to the Glazers taking over Man U. So they said FCUM and went out and started their own team. So that's been covered extensively in the BBC. And the type of visibility that we get for that, they have a tagline, making friends, not millionaires, which, we've changed to making friends into millionaires because we think people can make a lot of money doing things with publicly traded companies. And it's not a guarantee and it's not an absolutism. But we really think there's a lot of value to be realized there. So you'll see that in terms of ongoing news flow, the countries, the digital currencies, the ability to have name brand tournaments that feature even more the social impact soccer brand that we've brought, and perhaps investments in other mainstream clubs where we think we can add value.
No, I think that's super interesting, Dan, and we're definitely, going to be watching you guys closely as you mature and progress here. Anything I haven't mentioned that I should be bringing up that you'd like the opportunity to say?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, I want to say thank you for having me on the show. And again, I think you've taken a leadership position in this whole MCO model, before it became popular and before it became something that everybody is talking about. You've been a leader in the space, which is great. And again, it wasn't because it was just a bright new idea. It was something you believed in. So I want to thank you for your leadership, and I want to thank you for hosting the show on a variety of topics. But what I would add to the conversation is, it all starts with people. We have a very high profile board. Probably one of the most high profile people is Chris Gardner. He's one of our lead independent directors. And Chris Gardner, if you ever saw the movie The Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith, Chris Gardner is the person who was an unemployed homeless black man in San Francisco living in the restroom of a metro station with his 2-year-old son. And he rose up and he got that job as a stockbroker. And he then left and built his own firm, and then he retired. And then I had a chance to become acquainted with him a few years ago. And when he heard the Brera story, he just lit up. It's all about what he talks about in his most recent book, which is called Permission to Dream. So Permission to Dream talks about what his mom imparted to him, like, you can be anything and do anything. And so we're kind of giving some of these smaller clubs permission to dream. We're inspiring our fans in the same way. You don't have to be Milan or Inter and have $1 billion, 3 comma market cap in order to be relevant. And you can achieve things that you didn't think you could achieve. And we think a really good way of doing that is through the public markets. It's confirmed every day with Brera and the receptiveness we get, all the inbound like you enjoy with your business. And we're going to keep on executing. We're going to keep moving in that direction.
No, that's great to hear. And I definitely see the similar ethos between those stories, sort of the underdog nature. We're going to finish off, Dan, with just like a couple of quick hits. So we're not going to get tribal here, but I want to ask you, favorite sports event, live or virtual, you've ever seen or attended?
Well, it's going to be my bias for athletics, track and field.
Okay.
I happen to be on the board of that, but it's probably got to be David Rhodesia running under 1:41 seconds in the 800 in the 2012 Olympics in London. So I mean, that was just a breakthrough event. So I would actually put it there. I know I'm supposed to talk about Pele doing the bicycle kick, but I'm going to say it's something in athletics.
No, I love the novelty of the answer. That's super cool. It's something I did not expect, definitely, when asking that one. Okay, price on Manchester United, price on the Washington Commanders, and which one finishes higher? And I'll give you bonus points for guessing the buyer too.
So Man U definitely finishes higher.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely. And if you want me to project a price, I'm going to keep it at that sort of 6 billion number. So It's Man U at 6 billion.
Okay. Very cool. Any thoughts on buyers or will?
I think it's going to be an MCO operator or a large consortium of private equity. I don't see per se an individual buyer, although a couple from the UK are being offered up because it's such a prized asset. That's heavy concentration for someone, even if you're worth 30, $40 billion yourself. I think the Washington Commanders are different. You got Bezos sitting in the backyard there and with owning the WAPO. So, he's a man of, 100 billion plus of net worth. So perhaps he could pull off that. But I think it's going to come from a PE consortium.
Interesting. Very cool. Wrexham AFC, obviously, a hot button brand within the space right now. Do you think they'll ultimately be successful, and maybe any pages out of their book that you're looking to emulate?
I think they have been very successful, and it's all in the definition, right? So they've given relevance to this impoverished, beaten to death area of Wales that was never perceived, never thought it could happen in a million years. So just that, the effect they've had on changing people's lives and giving them something to live for once again, it's just been unbelievable. Now in the process, have the Hollywood principals been able to increase the value? Absolutely. I don't think they're in any hurry to realize that, to force a liquidity event, bring it to market. I think they're doing great based on the notoriety they achieved from Netflix. If the question is, are they going to try to get to the premiership? I think it's highly doubtful. I think if anything, their star power that they've been able to bring through social media, reality TV, and a moderate amount of capital will maybe inspire them to go after bigger fish in the future and have a similar message that they have. But I think the way they've put that small town on the map and the way they've affected people's lives in a positive manner has just been spectacular.
Very cool, Dan. Very cool. Okay. Most important book you've ever read, and I'll also accept your favorite podcast, just not this one.
So, most important book, Robert Caro, C-A-R-O, The Power Broker. It's a 1,083-page tome that talks about Robert Moses, who was the civil servant bureaucrat that created much of modern New York City. It reads like a novel. It's incredibly historically, factually documented. During a summer in Italy in 1982, I took it from my college library and kept it out several months and eventually brought it back. But that's a fantastic book. Anything by Robert Caro, he's such a prolific biographer. Tremendous.
That's a great answer. I love the Moses story. Where can our audience find you, learn more about the Brera project?
Sure. I'm gonna give you my podcast. It's got to be something, almost anything by Malcolm Gladwell. Really gets you thinking.
Okay.
Really with outliers and all the sports analogies that are buried in there about kids coming into hockey being the youngest kid in the oldest category, so that they learn through the repetition and 10,000 hours and everything else. So he's just gone on from there. But to know more about Brera, we're fully set up and functional at breraholdings.com, B-R-E-R-A. That's B-R-E-R-A. And our ticker is BREA on NASDAQ. And Brera, just so you know, it is a place name in Milan. It's kind of the Beverly Hills of Milan. It's an affluent, artsy, higher end area. And it's such a contrast to our street level team, the motley crew of immigrants and refugees and unemployed people teaching the rich kids how to play soccer at our soccer school. It's really kind of neat. But yeah, breraholdings.com. You can find out everything you'd like. And we look forward to your following.
Awesome, Dan. Well, look, it was an absolute pleasure having on the pod today. Thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate it.
You got it. And Dave, thanks for the great work that you do. Keep it going. You're inspiring a lot of people. You're showing them the art of the possible. And I really look forward to our continued interactions and collaboration.
Awesome, man. We'll bring you back on soon.
Thanks.
Take care. Thanks for listening to the Owners Club podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the show and leave a 5-star rating. Sign up on our platform, subscribe to the Owners Club newsletter, and follow FanClub Sports Capital on your favorite social media channels to join the largest community of pro sports owners. This is FanClub Sports Capital founder and CEO David Mirynech signing off, and we look forward to sharing more sports finance and M&A news with you next time on the Owners Club Podcast.